Suppose someone asked you to explain percent numbers. What would you say? Suppose someone asked you to explain percent problems. How would you do it? And suppose someone asked you to explain the difference between the two. How would you answer them? I know I couldn't do it, Mr. Cox. So let's see if we can answer those questions and others about percent numbers and percent problems. When you first learn about fraction, decimal, and percent arithmetic, you usually learn about them in that order. Fraction arithmetic first, decimal arithmetic next, then percent arithmetic. I'm going to assume that you already know fraction and decimal arithmetic, but it is not necessary to know these things in order to understand the concepts of percents. Let me list out the things that we'll be learning in this video. First, we will learn the basic definition of percent numbers. Next, we will learn what the connection is between percents and other basic numbers. Then we'll learn what a percent problem is and how to identify the different parts of that percent problem. And finally, we will learn how to use a formula so that we can find the missing numbers in those percent problems. Now let's get started. I'm ready, Mr. C. Let's get this show on the road. Let me put up a number on the board. What is this object? Well, that's easy. That's a percent number. Correct. And you should be able to read it. Well, that's easy too. It's 25%. Again, that's correct. But before we go any further, let me ask you another question. What, if anything, do these three types of numbers have in common with each other? Well, they're all parts of numbers, aren't they? That's partially correct. Bruno? Aren't they all pieces of something? Yes, but they have much more in common than that. You may or may not know that 25% is the same as the fraction 1/4. Yes, it is. And you may or may not know that numbers such as 50% is the same as 1/2 and 75% is the same as 3/4. Why is that? It's probably just something we memorized from seeing advertisements. All right, let's see if we can figure out just what the basic definition of a percent number is and how it's connected to the other basic numbers. Let's look at the number 25% again. Look at the percent symbol. That's really just shorthand notation for the word percent. Now let's break up the word into two parts, per and cent. When you talk about things like miles per gallon, you can write it as you state it like this. Or miles per hour would be written like this. Or $2 per pound would be written this way. Or feet per second would be written like this. You'll notice that the word per is written as a slash symbol or the fraction line. So let's replace the word per with the fraction slash line. Now what's the definition of cent? Doesn't cent mean pennies? Yes, that's one definition. It also means 100. Now let me replace the word cent with the number 100. You might recognize this thing I've just written. It's the fraction 2500ths, Mr. C. We've just rewritten 25% as the fraction 2500ths. One more step is that you can reduce this fraction to 1/4 by dividing both top and bottom by the common number 25. This is the reason that the number 25% can be rewritten as the fraction 1/4. Just remember that the word percent can literally be read as per 100 or per 100. Now let's take the number 75%. If you apply what I've just shown you, how would you rewrite this number? Well, you'd write the 75 with the fraction line. Then because cent means 100, you'd write that in the bottom. And what do you wind up with? The fraction 75/100ths. Yes, and can that be reduced? Yes, it can, by dividing the top and the bottom by the common number 25, which leaves 3/4. So 75% can be rewritten as the fraction 3/4. What about the number 50%? Let me give this a shot. Since percent is the same as per 100, we have 50 per 100, or the fraction 50/100ths. 50/100ths can be reduced by the common divisor 50, which reduces to the fraction 1/2. So you now know why these three percent numbers can be read as fraction numbers. Now that's pretty interesting. And just what can we conclude from this? Well, we can always write a percent number as a fraction simply by writing the number over 100. Is that always the case, Mr. Cox? Can every percent be rewritten as a fraction? Yes, they can. Now, fractional percents, such as 12.5%, and decimal numbers like 56 and 75/100ths%, are a little more complicated to rewrite as fractions, and we will look at those numbers later. But first, let's talk a little further about these three basic numbers. Before we start, I want you to memorize the order in which these are written, because it will help you to remember the steps to take when you change these from one to another. Look at this number again and tell me what it is.
Well, that's easy. We just said a minute ago it was the fraction 1/4.
Yes, I did. But first let me ask you what this word is.
Well, that's record.
No, isn't that record? Okay, which is it? Well, now that I think about it, I guess it could be both. That's right. The word has two different meanings. It could be the noun, record, or the verb, record. So it has two distinct different meanings depending on the context you're using it in. Now let's look at this object again. It actually has at least 4 different definitions. It could be interpreted as a fraction 1/4, or it could be interpreted as a ratio 1:4, or it could be interpreted as a probability 1 chance out of 4 chances of something occurring, or it could be interpreted as a division problem 1 divided by 4. Let's say I want to change this fraction into a decimal. That means I have to do some work, some arithmetic operation. So that means I have to interpret this as a division problem, 1 divided by 4. You write the division house alongside the bottom and imagine tilting the fraction so that the top number slides off into the division house. That way you'll always remember which number goes outside the division house and which one goes inside. It will never be the other way around. The next step is that when you're dividing a larger number into a smaller number, you have to write the smaller number as a decimal number and place some zeros behind the decimal point. We'll use 2 zeros for our examples. You could use more or less if you wanted to, and sometimes you will need more, other times you won't. Now place your decimal point in your answer directly above the decimal point in your problem and perform regular division. 4 divides into 10 at most 2 times with a remainder of 2. Bring down your 0 and perform your next division. 4 divides into 20 exactly 5 times with no remainder. As you can see, I've just turned the fraction 1/4 into the decimal 25/100ths. Now let's change 3/4 and 1/2. To change 3/4 into a decimal, we must divide 4 into 3. Again, write the 3 as a decimal number and carry it out to 2 places. Then place a decimal point in the answer directly above the decimal point in your problem and start dividing. 4 divides into 30 at most 7 times with a remainder of 2. Bring down the remaining 0 and perform the next division. 4 divides into 20 exactly 5 times with no remainder. We've just turned the fraction 3/4 into the decimal number 75/100ths. Now for the fraction 1/2. You're going to divide 2 into 1. Write 1 as a decimal number, place 2 zeros behind the decimal point, and place the decimal point in your answer. Now 2 divides into 10 exactly 5 times with no remainder. As you can see, we've changed a fraction 1/2 into the decimal 5/10. These are the steps you perform anytime you want to change a fraction into a decimal. Now what if we want to go a step further and change these decimals into percents? Here's where remembering this order will help you. You probably vaguely remember something about moving a decimal point in some direction some number of places when changing decimals to percents and percents back to decimals. The trouble was remembering which direction and how many places. Yes, I vaguely remember something about that.
Me too, Mr. Slay.
Okay, let's look at our board again. You'll notice that if we're moving from decimals to percents, we're moving to the right. So if we want to change 25/100ths to a percent, we move the decimal 2 places to the right and attach a percent symbol. It will always be 2 places either to the right or to the left, depending on which direction you're going. Now when our decimal point winds up at the end of a whole number, you can drop it. So as you can see, the fraction 1/4 can be written as a decimal 25/100ths, which can then be written as a percent 25%. What this means is that fraction, decimal, and percent numbers are actually just 3 different ways to write the same thing. So how would you change 75/100ths to a percent, Irving?
Well, that's easy. You move the decimal 2 places to the right, then attach a percent symbol. And you can drop the decimal point when you're finished because it's at the end of a whole number.
How about 5/10? Well, I'm guessing that you'd have to add a 0 to the 5/10 in order to move the decimal point 2 places to the right. Then you attach a percent symbol and drop the decimal point because it's at the end of a whole number. Now let's look at fractional percent numbers and decimal percent numbers. How would you change 33 1/3% into a fraction? Remember the rule. You write the number over 100 and you get 33 1/3 divided by 100.
That doesn't look right, Mr. C.
That's because it's a complex fraction, and in order to simplify it, you have to rewrite it. You must rewrite this division problem as a standard fraction division problem like this. If you've already had fraction arithmetic, you should know how to do this. We must do three things first before we can perform this arithmetic. First, we have to rewrite 33 1/3 as the improper fraction 100 over 3. Next, we turn the division into multiplication and flip over the number on the right-hand side. But before we can do that, we have to write it over 1, so when we flip it over, it becomes 1 over 100. Before we multiply, we can cross-cancel the 100s, then we multiply the tops across and the bottoms across to get the answer 1/3. So 33 1/3% can be rewritten as a fraction 1/3.
That was a lot of work to do, Mr. C.
Yes, it was, Irving, but those are the steps necessary to change fractional percent numbers into fractions. Now let's do the next one, 12.5%. Bruno, what are the steps necessary to change this number into a fraction? You write the 12.5 over 100, then you rewrite it as a fraction division problem. Next, you rewrite 12.5 as the improper fraction 25 over 2. Turn it into multiplication and write the 100 over 1 and flip it over to 1 over 100. What next, Irving?
You can reduce the 25 and the 100 by 25, which leaves 1/2 times 1/4. And multiplying that gives you the answer 1/8.
12.5% can be changed to the fraction 1/8. Now what about the decimal percent numbers, such as 8 5/10%?
I imagine you write the number over 100 like this, but I'm not sure what to do next.
If you multiply the top of the fraction by 10, you can get rid of the decimal number. But if you multiply the top by 10, you must also multiply the bottom by 10 to get 1,000. 85 over 1,000 can be reduced by the common number 5, which leaves 17 200ths. So 8 5/10% can be changed to the fraction 17 200ths. Now what about 20 2500%?
You write 20 2500ths over 100, and I'm guessing that to get rid of the decimal number in the top, you'd have to multiply it by 100 to move the decimal place over 2 places. And you must also multiply the bottom by 100, which is now 10,000, or 2025 over 10,000. The top and the bottom can be reduced by 25, which leaves 81 400ths.
Yes, the answer is 81 over 400. Well done. Now let's change some percents to decimals, then the fractions to see how to make sure we understand how these are connected to each other. If you want to change 25% to a decimal, you know you have to move the decimal 2 places in a certain direction. You should also know that every whole number has a decimal point associated with it. If you don't see the decimal point in the number, it's understood that it's at the end of the number. You can see that if we're going from percents to decimals, we're moving to the left. We move the decimal 2 places to the left, and it winds up in front of the 2, and we drop the percent symbol. And how do you read that number?
2500ths, Mr. C.
And now we want to change that to a fraction number. Because it's hundredths, we write the 25 over 100. Now this can be reduced. Yes, the top and the bottom can be divided by the common number 25, which leaves 1/4. What about the next one, 8%? It's understood that the decimal point is behind the 8. In order to move the decimal point 2 places to the left, we have to add a 0, then move it 2 places, which gives us the decimal number 800ths. How do you change that into a fraction?
Since it's in hundredths, we write it as 8 over 100, then reduce the top and bottom by the common number 4, which leaves the fraction 2/25ths.
Yes. How about the next one, Bruno? In order to move the decimal point 2 places to the left, we have to add 2 zeros to the front of this number, then move the decimal point and drop the percent symbol. And how do you read that? It's 65 10,000ths. And to change it to a fraction, because it's in the 10,000ths place, we write the number 65 over 10,000. What's the common number in this fraction?
It's 5, and it reduces to the fraction 13 2,000ths.
Now what about 8 3/4%?
Let me give this a shot. The decimal is understood to be directly after the whole number. In order to move it 2 places to the left, we have to add a 0